Hi, my name's Eric Reynolds. I'm the associate publisher at Fantagraphics Books here in Seattle, and I'm very excited to welcome y'all to the I Am Not Okay With This panel featuring graphic novelist Charles Forsman, as well as the esteemed Jonathan Entwistle, the director of the the Netflix adaptation of the graphic novel by Chuck, as well as Wyatt Oleff, who plays the wonderful Stanley Barber on the show. Thank you all for joining me, and I was wondering if you could all just tell me, I guess first of all, where are you and how are you doing? Chuck, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. I'm at home in beautiful Western Massachusetts. Just hanging in there, trying to keep working and drawing comic books as much as I can, and yeah, doing a little bit of yard work at my newish house we just moved into. So that's been a nice meditation to get away from everything. But yeah, doing okay.
How about you, Jonathan?
I'm in good old Los Angeles, trying to kind of survive the enduring apocalypse whilst trying to keep working, trying not to, spend too much time inside, which is the beauty of when you're not in Western Massachusetts. I guess you can do more outside here, which is kind of nice. But yeah, feeling the strain like everyone, I imagine.
Yeah. How about you, Wyatt? Are you in LA as well?
Yes, I am in Los Angeles. Recently moved as well, and I'm not working. I'm kind of focusing on creating my own stuff and writing and all that fun stuff, but it's not consistent yet, so we'll see what happens there.
I imagine, Jonathan, you're mostly doing writing and as opposed to active production of anything.
Yeah, we've been trying to put things together and working on writers' rooms on Zoom, and spending 40 hours of a week staring at a screen can be quite tiring, and it seems creative at first, and then after a while it's painful. Yeah, and when you don't realize you've been talking all day when you've been talking at a screen, and it's not the most fun nor the most conducive to creative things. But I guess we are all in the same boat when it comes to any type of writing or crafting of anything.
Well, TV and film is such a collaborative effort. I mean, Chuck's well accustomed to sitting at home by himself and doing his own thing, right? I mean, it's the cartoonist life is considerably different from professional and television.
Yeah, when the quarantine happened, I felt a little bad because I was so used to staying at home, not going out thing, but it did catch up with me. It's tough when the whole world's shut down. It's a strange thing, but
well, I've talked to a lot of cartoonists over the last few months who've kind of said a similar thing, which is that even though you theoretically may have more time on your hands because you're not going to your part-time job or doing this or that, it's harder to focus just with all of the attendant pressures in the world right now. Have you kind of experienced that? Have you navigated it?
Yeah.
Any of you?
Yeah, I've definitely felt that. I mean, I'm very concerned with the world at large, and I'm going to a protest tomorrow, and it's hard to concentrate on my little comic book when it feels like there's so much bigger pressing issues happening. What about you guys?
Yeah, I feel like it's a strange new way of working. There's a sort of inside life where you're doing things, and then there's an outside world which is not based on restaurants and bars and movie theaters and shopping malls. Although there are some states in America where it is, but I think in general it's just strange to kind of miss out on that variety and then have these two: an inside life and an outside life, and maybe a third life, which is what you see on social media. So it's a very strange new way of working, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens when it does eventually ebb and end, whenever that may be.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about the show and the book a little bit. I was wondering, Jonathan, and this is kind of directed at both of you guys, Wyatt and Jonathan. I love Stanley in the show. I mean, he was really, I thought, you know, kind of a surprise scene stealer, because he's not as much of a prominent character in the book as he is in the show. And in some ways, Jonathan, I kind of felt like more than any character in either of the two shows, he kind of feels like your baby. And I was wondering, you know, how much of him did you know, is in you?
I mean, Wyatt, you can go first on that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I kind of remember asking you about that and just like hearing that like you put a lot of yourself into the character. It's kind of hard to see because I feel like there's a lot more like subtext that goes along with you and the character that matches more closely than just like the front personality kind of thing. Because you know you're not like the most energetic person in the room all the time, but yeah, it's that transformation from, or the transformation with the adaptation is really interesting. I don't really know the full process behind that, but
it's definitely true that well, I remember when I first read the book, and I thought I'd never read a character like Stanley is in the book, as often is the case, and as many of the ways when I first came across Chuck's work, I saw something I'd never seen before, in a sense of cinematic comic book writing, and also the characters feeling like movie characters. And when I read Stanley Barber, I was like, even in that different style of work, of drawing that is I'm Not Okay With This for Chuck, I still saw a different type of character than I'd seen before. And when I was pitching the idea of making the show, I was like, have we ever seen a character that is like not driven by romance, where the main character loses their virginity within the first 5 pages, you know, and then it's no longer an issue anymore? And I was like, that's an awesome thing. Most shows are driven by romance, and you know, it's like, will I get to go to the prom with the kooky guy? And that's just not a feature of Stan. So that was my immediate jumping off point with him, and it was something that I think I wanted to do with End, was to not have the romance driving and will they lose their virginity to each other thing to drive the actual show. And it was something with this. And I think interestingly, Wyatt maybe doesn't know this, but there is a video of, I have a tendency on set, as Wyatt knows, to line read and to act it out, which really annoys them. But early on in the show, like before Wyatt had like learned to talk back to me when he was being polite, there was a sequence in the bowling alley, I think it's episode 4 in the show, where I must have, with the DP, like walked through the scene, and like I actually kind of walked through it and did all the stuff, and there's somebody videoed it, so we had a video of the rehearsal. And then when Wyatt went on to do it, when I see it on the screen, lots of the stuff we used in the edit, it's like it's very much him doing me. Like when he stands up, he does a few things, and I was like, whenever I see that, I see me. And weirdly, you know, Jessica Barden, who plays Alyssa, it's like we talk about it all the time, and she always makes a point of saying that Alyssa was never her, it was always me. And many people have said that to me, in like that Jess's version of Alyssa is 50-50 me and her in many ways. But obviously Chuck knows Jess as well as I do, and she's definitely Alyssa in real life. But yeah, so it's interesting. I think I think it's a process. And Stanley Barber, by the time we got to some of the key scenes with Stanley in the show, Wyatt had taken everything we talked about and turned it into the thing. But there are a few little moments in the stuff we shot early on in the show where I can see. And it makes me go like, oh, am I that bad at directing that he has to copy?
So I think personally it was more of like I didn't know the boundaries of everyone on set, so I didn't want to like act like I knew everything about like the character and the stories and what you wanted from it. So like I didn't want to like go outside of my comfort zone there, but you know, after a while I think it got easier to do.
It's obviously the best scene as well because it's acting like me, so obviously.
Right, yeah, of course.
So why is it true that this was annoying of Jonathan, to the way that he would line read your part?
The first actor to say it, Wyatt, so.
Yeah,
I imagine, in all seriousness, is it hard to then not do an impression of what he's doing versus, you know?
Don't get it started on the British accent thing.
Yeah, I like to imitate Jonathan a lot. I like to, imitation is the most sincere form of flattery.
Right.
Wait, yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Uh,
right.
Yeah, you got it.
but it's definitely interesting because seeing how Jonathan already knows what he wants from it is kind of more reassuring than anything else, and just being able to go off of that. And I don't think, personally, I try to like do it like Jonathan would. I'm thinking more as like how would Stanley do it. But I'm glad it translated that I was acting like Jonathan for him, because obviously that's what he likes. So
Well, it's funny because I don't know Jonathan that well. We've corresponded and talked on the phone once, but so I don't know. I didn't know if Stanley was actually like a reflection of Jonathan's personality or not. But he's just such a wonderful, fully realized character that I sort of imagine he almost had to be. So Chuck, what's it like I mean, any character that you see come to life, on either one of these shows has to both be surreal, and it also has to spark, it has to spark positive and negative reactions sometimes when you see something that's not entirely how you saw it in your head. Just what's that experience been like?
Yeah, there's like,
What's it like for you when you watch the show, for the very first time?
it's sort of like, it feels like, yeah, like I have this deep connection to these characters. So there's this very intimate feeling, especially with like this stuff with Sid and her dad, like that stuff, it really hits home to me. Because my dad died when I was 11, so like a lot of those, those scenes I put in the book with her sort of wrestling with that and talking to her mom, like that, a lot of that stuff is like real, comes from a real place for me. So like all that stuff hits really hard for me. And it's almost like it's really hard for me to watch, actually, because it is such a personal thing. And there's also like this total disconnect, because like I try and compartmentalize. Like I like to say, even for the end, it was just like, I have my book and I trust Jonathan to make something cool. And, he's not going to come in and rearrange the pages in my book or take stuff out. I have that book. So I sort of have that cut off in my mind. And luckily I've had Jonathan there on these projects, someone I really trust. And I want him to make a good TV show and not worry about, making an exact replica of what I put into my pages.
For sure.
And I think that Chuck and I have talked at great length about these. There are sort of certain boundaries. I'm aware of what is key to him, and I do make sure that remains within the lifeblood of the show, because that's the DNA. And every time we rebuild it from there, otherwise I would have made it up myself and not used one of Chuck's books.
Sure.
So it's important that it keeps that. And I think that, I made a short film version of End of the Fucking World very, very long time ago. And in a way, that was partially to convince Chuck that I can handle his children. I'm aware of what I can, that we can do something that is really good, and we're not just going to kind of like throw it in the trash. And I think that was me trying to earn his respect so that I could get the opportunity to keep moving forwards. And I think that is absolutely important. We've all heard thousands of stories of comic books being destroyed by different creatives taking things in different directions. And for me, there was never a point why I would want to not involve Chuck in these decisions. It didn't.
Yeah, right. But you've been great at like, it can be a dead end to, like Chuck said, to make a, just completely faithful literal adaptation of something. And you've done a great job at kind of, recognizing, I think, where, for a TV series, we just need to go in different directions. We need to do different things. One of my favorite things that, a lot of people have talked about in regard to both shows is your strong taste in music.
Oh yeah.
I gather from just talking to you a little bit that is pretty much you. Do you have like a mixtape before you go into
Oh,
shooting, or do you let the scenes kind of dictate the mood, or which comes?
when Chuck and I first started talking about End, what, 2010, 2012, something like that, there was like, we have a playlist that probably has, I don't know, 1,000, 1,500 songs on it from back then. Like, we were talking about the music, and when we talked about I'm Not Okay With This, Chuck is sending things through to me all the time, and he has like a fascination with a sort of mid to late 80s English indie scene stuff that to me is fascinating. Billy Childish, The Wedding Present.
Right.
We're talking about these things, and obviously Graham Coxon was I was a huge fan of Graham's growing up, and so was Chuck. And when we were able to get Graham to work with us on End, I mean, for both of us, it was a life goal. And Chuck did the sleeve design for the single, and it's just been awesome. And we got to go to the BAFTAs together, and that to me is like the synergy of what Chuck and I have talked about many years ago, with him allowing me to then say, we're making a teen show, let's play with what teen shows have. With End, it was the birth of the teenager, the 50s stuff. And then with I'm Not Okay With This, it was like the fantasy of the American high school, and the John Hughes, and we got to play around with that. And the 80s angle we took with that, which was very much leading off from Chuck, was this idea of the Jesus and Mary chain, the kind of the goth band, which is what became Blood Witch, of course, which Chuck invented. And Graham was like, 100% I am Blood Witch. I'm doing a full album as Blood Witch, and that is not negotiable. And that was how we really pitched the music for the second for the season. So it's just I think it was just we had a very clear idea each time about music, I think. And music is a center of really lots of the things I do. Cool music is always cool. Like, no matter what you do, what you say, it makes scenes better and it makes them cooler. Every Wes Anderson movie is cooler because of the David Bowie stuff. It just like straight off that, it works, and it's very simple. And when you get it right, it can be really good. And Chuck and I do have quite different tastes across the board when it comes to things, but there's just something in what we've managed to form together where the two things do go together really well. And I think I'm aware of what's good when I see it, and that's why, I've loved those books from the beginning and tried my hardest to do them justice and still make something cool.
You guys, I mean, between the casting in the show and the production and execution of the shows, it's clear that you guys have a certain mind meld in terms of tapping that kind of teenage ennui or angst or disaffection in a way that's really powerful. I mean, it's a common thread through virtually everything each of you has done.
Yeah, and I'll say that there are elements of Chuck's books that I wish I'd been able to do in television, but the truth of the matter is that often they are at their best as the books. And so in many ways they are cooler art forms. I love my shows, but there are threads in End and threads in I'm Not Okay With This that are really cool. The darker side of it, there's elements in End, the satanic murder club of End, and the element, the darker sides of I'm Not Okay With This, the monster in the corner of the room, like all of those things are things that I really love from the books, and kind of wish we'd found a way to do that.
Yeah. So let me ask Wyatt and Jonathan, what is your relationship with comics throughout your life? And, just were you a reader of comics? Wyatt, I actually didn't realize this until today I'm trying to cram for this. This isn't your first comic book adaptation rodeo, as the poster behind you suggests. So, what is your relationship with comics? Are you a comics fan? Do you?
Yeah, I'd say I want to say that I'm a big fan of comics, but for me, it's I've never collected or really read a lot of them. I mean, of course, every time I do an adaptation of something, which is more often than it seems, I always go back and look at the source material, of course. But I've never really collected a lot in my past. But there are a few like authors like that I'll go and make sure I get their latest stuff. But I'm personally not as big on collecting. But
I would
I want to be, but it just seems like not my exact kind of collecting, I guess.
I would imagine
you
like
don't, yeah, you don't want to be a collector, Wyatt. That's
yeah.
that's a
I would
bad.
I'm a collector of other things, but yeah.
I would imagine being, being an adult, and being, given, cast in a role like Guardians of the Galaxy, and then just having someone drop a handful of Guardians of the Galaxy comics in your lap would be like a completely disorienting and baffling experience.
And well, what's weird about, especially like for something like Guardians, it's so different from its source material, and like, reading all the different interpretations of like Peter Quill's backstory, like stuff like that can get kind of
Yeah, it almost seems
confusing.
unhelpful.
Yeah, sometimes, but I mean, you just got to trust the vision of whoever's leading the charge, and
Right.
that usually works out sometimes.
And how about you, Jonathan? What's your history with comics?
Yeah, I mean, I read them as a kid. My grandparents owned newsagents in the UK, which is like I don't know what the
Oh, wow.
equivalent is. But so my dad grew up with those first UK reprints of the Marvel comics, and we had those old school Spider-Man and those things at home when I was a kid. But I do think that really I came slightly later to it via the Rick Remender Uncanny X-Men, Uncanny Avengers. Those were my first kind of foray back into comics, where I was like, whoa, you can do that with Wolverine and Deadpool. And it really opened up a world of that for me. And then I did a bunch of years judging the British Comic Book Awards. And I did a few things along those lines. And then I just got into reading the kind of indie comics, which a lot of them were the self-published and all of these things. And I found that amongst the a lot of them were kind of portmanteau pieces with half silkscreen prints. A lot of it was very graphic and not necessarily story driven.
Mm-hmm.
That drew me always to the section of the self-published titles when I would go, to the comic book store, and I would see that. And that's invariably where I found End, was in that section. So my through line was very much like I had a grounding of those old school Marvel comics. That then turned into, as an adult, really searching for, reading Planetary and reading those kind of the classic modern comic books that still had that superhero pastiche. And then from there, that kind of turned into getting deeper into the indie stuff. And really, it's from there that I've slowly enjoyed. Story is what I'm looking for every time. And when I find that in the indie side, that always blows my mind. That really excites me.
Did you ever draw? Were you ever?
No, I wish. I used to trace round Spider-Man and then draw it and make it look like I'd drawn it myself. Like that whole thing where you pretend to do that. My dad's a draftsman, so I definitely he had all the ink pens and everything, and I thought I was cool. And my dad was quite a good drawer, but no, I wish I could. Yeah.
Were you a fan of like the British humor comics, like Beano and?
Yeah, I mean, every kid grew up with those. The Desperate Dan stuff and the Beano, like that just existed. That was in every day. You would buy them from the newsstand, and they were like this big, printed on brown newsprint. It was just a normal thing. And we have this character called Roy of the Rovers. I'm a big soccer fan, and there was this Roy of the Rovers character who was just a kid who was like 16, and he was in like the top team. And it was just, I just remember those things. And my grandfather had been in the army, and so I remember we had these little penny comics that were just kind of like war stories, and he was a huge Western. And comics to me, there were two platforms. They were that stuff, and then there was superheroes. And superheroes for me was something completely separate from the other elements of comics. So as I got older, I learned that they were the same thing. And then I also learned later that graphic novels and comics are the same thing. So there was this big movement where it was like a graphic novel is somehow more cool than a comic book. Right. I learned much later on that they're the same. And that was quite fascinating, sort of coming from the rise of that culture. So yeah, and then dipping a toe in and thankfully making an adaptation that was very positive. So I never felt the wrath of doing it wrong, which I'm forever thankful for.
Well, yeah, Chuck, I think knows how lucky he is. I mean, it's one thing to have somebody adapt your work into something that gets made and is successful, but it's another thing entirely for it to also be good.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's like, yeah. I mean, it's, yeah. What I think the best advice I got when the end was first optioned was my one of my old mentors, teachers, James Sturm. He said to treat it like you just bought a lottery ticket, because it's like anyone, almost anyone could get their book options. Like it's really easy, but like to actually have it get made is a miracle, and then to have it be good is a even bigger miracle on top of that, I feel like.
For
So
sure.
I feel really really blessed that John found me.
What do we know if there's going to be a season 2 yet?
We don't know yet. We
don't know
we
yet.
hope so. Yeah, we're fingers crossed, and we like that everybody loved the first season so much. So we're hoping. I think COVID has changed production schedules somewhat. So I think those are really the conversations that are going on behind the doors at the moment.
Do you do the casting?
I pretty much do everything.
Yeah.
So, we have a great team to help us out with all of that. But yeah, we very much were, kind of like putting it together.
John was like, I got to visit the production offices and like the set for a week, and John was like, he took on a lot of responsibility on this show. He was like the general, like in
Yeah. I
him
assumed
through
so, but I know that every show's different in terms of that kind of thing. And the reason I ask is that I think it's incredible how in both shows you've cast, 4 pitch perfect leads. Just phenomenal. I mean, and it's interesting to me that extends, you also have a really pitch perfect ear for the music, and and you've done so in a way that's so faithful to what I think is a really wonderful book.
And I think really the holistic approach is the art form of doing good television. And I think it's the directing side of my job is very much the craft side. Yeah. And I will say that the overseeing and the kind of managing of the system is actually the art form in many ways. And I think, when it comes down to the casting, I mean, Wyatt will tell you what a crazy story, really. I'd be interested to hear it from his point of view, but I know that we cast Sophia quite early on. And those of us that know Sophia know that she is about 4'11" tall. And, when we were then auditioned, at the time she was 16 when we started, maybe just 17. And when we went to audition her with other actors for Stanley, we were looking at people who were over 18 so that we could work hours better. Right. And these guys would come in, they'd be 22 with like 5 o'clock shadow. I mean, I know Wyatt's got like a beard going on now, but like they would come in with 5 o'clock shadow and they'd be 6'3" and they'd be hunky Los Angeles actors. And then Sophia would sit next to them and she looked like a 10-year-old next to them. So we were like, this is creepy. Like we really have to open up the system so that we can get some younger actors in, because at first it is prohibitive to work with underage actors because of the laws.
Yeah.
So we finally managed to do it, and then Sophia had worked with Wyatt on it, and she was like, "Oh, you should check out my friend Wyatt. He's not very good, but he's kind of funny." And so I thought it was quite a good impression of Sophia, actually.
That was good, yeah.
And so then. Wyatt knows this. Wyatt's dad sent this through with Wyatt's audition tape, this amazing mashup video that kids had made on YouTube of shipping the Sophia and Wyatt together, off from It and from It 2 and from all the press they'd done together. And I was like, boom, this is going to work. This is really cool that people already think they're a thing. And then I watched the tape and I was like, awesome. Somebody who's actually, Wyatt was 15 at the time, somebody who is actually the age of the character. And right. Anthony Michael Hall was 15 when they did Breakfast Club. And I was like, this makes so much sense. So
Stanley's supposed to be 15?
Yeah. Oh. No, he's supposed to be 17, 16, 17.
Okay. All right.
He's 16 now.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so it just made so much sense. It was literally like a light bulb when you saw Sophia and Wyatt together. And I think it was just this sort of this sort of perfect medium, really, that all came together. With it in that sense, where it just worked out.
Yeah, I really appreciated that about the casting and casting younger, because we all know there's so many teen shows on TV with the going back to like the 90s, Beverly Hills 90210 was like filled with like people in their 20s and 30s, and it
Right.
just looked ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, have you guys been to Comic-Con before? Have any of you?
Yeah,
Right.
right now.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
No.
We're here right now.
You have one.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
went, I guess 3 years ago now for It One. We went to go do like a signing there before the movie came out in September, and it was definitely a wild experience. It was kind of, um, it was that? Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd say that was like my first kind of con experience. I've been to a lot more recently, or not more recently, but I've been to a lot after that, and definitely Comic-Con's the biggest one I've been to because it is the biggest one, and it's such like a, I don't know, I guess like, I don't know if inviting's the right word, but it's not overwhelming in a sense where like it's too much. It's just like there's so much and you want to see it all. And it's definitely, something I think a lot of people should experience if they're into that kind of stuff.
And did you say you've been before, Jonathan, or no?
No, I'd love to.
Have you been, Chuck? I couldn't remember if you've been down there or not.
I went way before I was a cartoonist. I went once in, I think 2003 or 2004. It was
Okay.
when you could just show up and still buy
Buy
a
a
ticket,
ticket.
walk in.
Yeah.
But still, I remember like I drove down there from LA and like parked like, God, I don't know, 20, 30 blocks away from the convention center.
Right.
And I walked all the way there and I got a ticket and walked in. And it was very overwhelming. I was just sort of getting back into comics at that time. And I only really remember seeing Peter Bagg at a table, who was, one of your published cartoonists through Fantagraphics. I picked up Hate as a teenager, and that was one of the books that changed my perception of what comics could be. And I was way too nervous. I didn't say anything to him. But I also saw Jeannie Schultz, who was Charles Schultz's widow. And I think
Wonderful lady.
I said something to her. She was really sweet to me. But yeah, and I was just super overwhelmed by the crowds. And I just I was like, I got to get out of here. This is too much.
I thought it would be interesting if we were doing this Comic-Con panel remotely in isolation. Yeah. None of you had actually been to Comic-Con. So I think, we're kind of getting close to the end of this here. I wondered if you guys wanted to plug anything that you're working on. I'm just kind of curious to know. And I'll start with you, Wyatt, because you said you're not really, working your traditional day job right now. What are you doing creatively to days?
Creatively, I'm kind of just thinking about ideas and writing stuff down. I haven't really gotten anything concrete, like most people, but I've talked to a lot of my friends, for one of them being Rich Ellis, who plays Bradley on the show, and he's writing stuff, and he's got an amazing script right now, and it's really inspiring, especially when you see like your friends like go from one part of the acting business or one part of the business to going and directing and writing their own thing. And I've seen a couple of my friends' short films, and they're all just like, it's really inspiring. So I just want to be on that level with them. And I've done a few short films myself. I got to co-direct one, and it's definitely something I can't wait to work more on.
Cool.
Yeah.
How about you, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still, mapping out hopefully what happens to Sydney and Stanley and Dina moving forward in that show. In the meantime, as many people know, I'm kind of helming the reboot of Power Rangers over at Paramount, which is like a very slow burn, something that's going to be much further away in the future. And that's very exciting, and very much enjoying mapping out the universe for that whole world. So that's kind of taking up my time, really.
Do you have a background with Power Rangers? Like I'm not like I think I'm unaged where they weren't a part of my life.
Other than growing up with them, I'm 36. So when it was released in the UK, I was like 10, pretty much. So it was perfect for me, and I loved it when I was growing up, and I'm just very excited that I've been given the opportunity to rebuild that world in the version that I had in my mind when I had my my Green Ranger and my Red Ranger action figures. So I mean, there's nothing more than you could want. And so, yeah, right now it's very early stages, universe building and defining for hopefully something that's going to be really cool.
Wow.
I can't wait for the Graham Coxon Power Rangers theme.
Amen. What about you, Chuck? I actually don't know what all you're working on these days.
Comics wise, I'm doing a book called Automa, which is like my Terminator 2 inspired sci-fi book that I'm self-publishing chapter by chapter. That you can subscribe to it on through my Patreon. I'm doing a book with I guess I can talk about this because it's almost official now, but we haven't done the announcement yet. But one of my favorite cartoonists I'm collaborating with, Benjamin Mara, we're going to do a book together. That's again another like sort of sci-fi, maybe like European comics inspired book. So we're just sort of starting to dive into that and really going hard on that. But Ben's one of my favorite cartoonists, and it's a dream come true being able to work with him. And I also started a podcast of all things. I started it's all about B horror movies, low rent horror movies we call them. Me and my friend Dale Andrews do it every week. And it's been great. It's a great excuse to just watch these movies that we want to watch but don't necessarily get the chance to. So now it's cool to have homework. So yeah, it's called Bat and Spider is the name of it. Batandspider.com.
And let's not forget, Chuck and I are also kind of working on something for the first time where we're going to collaborate writing something together. So that's kind of very early stages, but also exciting. So we are doing stuff in COVID lockdown. So yeah.
There you go. That's fantastic. Well, I didn't have too many other questions prepared, so I don't know if do you have anything that you guys would want to ask each other? Not to put you on the spot. And if you don't, that's all right too.
Oh, I got one. Jonathan, who are you, thinking about casting for your Power Rangers?
It's definitely too early to have those casting.
Can I be who's the guy? Who did Bryan Cranston play? He was like the guy in the tube, right?
Yeah.
I want to be that guy.
Yeah, maybe Forsman for Zordon. Definitely not Wyatt Oleff for any of the Rangers after that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it's required by like the Screen Actors Guild to employ the guy who always does the CGI characters. I can't remember.
That guy, yeah.
If there's a faceless, physical actor required. Yeah. But well, anyway, I do think we're pretty much at the end of our time. So I do really want to thank you guys for joining in and talking. It's great to hear from you, and I hope you're safe and sound where you are, and even more. So I hope we'll see you in San Diego next summer.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for doing this, Eric. This was great to get together and hang out with you guys for a little bit.
Yeah.
Right on. Yeah, it's a pleasure to meet you guys virtually.
Thank you so much.
All right.